Ride the High Country is a 1962 CinemaScope Western that was directed by Sam Peckinpah, and it starred Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea and Mariette Hartley. The supporting cast was made up of Edgar Buchanan, James Drury, and Warren Oates. And the story is about two aging gunslingers that sign on to transport gold from a remote mining town. This is actually the final film for Randolph Scott. He retired from acting once he saw the finished film, saying that he wanted to quit while he was ahead and that he would never actually be able to do any better work than this. Joel McCrea also retired after making this movie, but he later agreed to appear in a few more films. He finally retired from acting at the age of 69 after making Mustang Country in 1976. MGM had no faith in this movie at all. They actually dumped it on the market as the lower half of a double feature. And this was despite the protest of Sam Peckinpah and Richard Lyons. It was actually paired with just ridiculous movies like The Boys' Night Out from 1962 and the Italian-produced The Tartars from 1961. When the studio discovered that the film was the real moneymaker of the double billings and that audiences weren't staying around for the main feature, they re-released it to much better results. The film had originally been intended for Gary Cooper and John Wayne, but Cooper died before the film began. But it's pretty unlikely that John Wayne and Gary Cooper would have worked together on this anyway, since they turned down the opportunity to work together on Far Horizons in 1955. The film was shot in various locations in and around LA, including Malibu Canyon, and it was shot on the 20th Century Fox backlot. You actually see smoke from fires raging in the Topanga Canyon and Bel Air. It darkens the skies over this area, and it seriously complicated the shooting of the movie. Sam Peckinpah insisted that the background terrain had to change noticeably during the trek to and from the mountain mining town, and he convinced the studio to let him shoot the riding sequences on location rather than on the backlot. Now, an interesting point of this is the canvases they used to make the tents in the mining camp came from leftover sales that MGM's Mutiny on the Bounty from 1962 had used. The shooting was completed in less than a month, but the chief editor of MGM, Margaret Booth, she just disliked the daily rushes and thought the film would be impossible to cut. There were other people in the studio that had faith in Sam Peckinpah, and they gave him the rare chance to make the cuts in the picture. Peckinpah went into an intense editing session with the veteran editor Frank Santillo. Everybody was super impressed with Peckinpah's ideas and changes that he made to bring out character nuances in his editing and in his selection of shots. His trimming and refining the movie was unbelievable. The question of who would receive top billing was actually figured out at the Brown Derby restaurant in Hollywood. And this was done by a coin toss in which Randolph Scott won. This was Sam Peckinpah's second film. The cast include R.G. Armstrong, L.Q. Jones, John Davis Chandler, Warren Oates, and these were frequent cast members of Peckinpah's films. And they became a part of his quasi Sam Peckinpah stock company, much like the John Ford stock company associated with Ford. Mariette Hartley, whose previous acting experience was only on stage and who actually came from a pretty sheltered background. She actually later admitted that she didn't even know who Joel McCrea was when she showed up to the audition for the part of Elsa. Sam Peckinpah kept her there all day, having her read with various actors that were auditioning for the role of Heck. And this included Wayne Rogers. Yeah, that's Wayne Rogers from MASH fame. She was flattered that they kept her there all day, and she didn't even realize that this meant that she had the role. Sam Peckinpah took an inordinate interest in Mariette Hartley's costume. He took her into the bowels of MGM's costume department to find the right dress. And then he had the wardrobe department pad it until the chest was sufficiently full. He filled it up so much he almost made her walk with a tilt. And Mariette Hartley's hair was cut really short for her playing Joan of Arc on stage in Chicago. And for the screen test that she used at the studio, they actually put a long wig on her that kind of matched her natural red hair. Sam Peckinpah hated it, and he decided to use her closely cropped look for the film. Now, it's said that Joel McCrea said that he got along pretty well with Sam Peckinpah, but Sam Peckinpah is known to be a pretty tough director. And Joel McCrea just didn't like the way that the director treated the crew. He was more like John Ford. He would berate someone to no end if they made a mistake or if they failed to do what he wanted. Peckinpah at this point began his practice of firing people for one mistake, such as a sound boom operator who allowed the boom to creep into a shot. This really harsh practice became a habit of Peckinpah's as he continued on directing films, and he was prone to do it fairly often. Peckinpah also had a number of other details and impressions from his own life that were worked into the script. His ancestors were actually true Westerners, and there was a mountain named for the Peckinpahs near Coarsegold, the real-life town where the two lawmen in the movie ride to retrieve the shipment of gold. During his childhood, Peckinpah had been taken by his grandfather to a town very much like the mining town that was in the movie. It said that Joel McCrea and Randolph Scott thought that Peckinpah's rewrites were just brilliant. Peckinpah also received no credit for his script work on this film, but he also told MGM and the Academy that if this film was nominated for Best Screenplay without his name on it as a writer, he said he would sue every one of you. But the movie never received any such nominations. By most accounts, Sam Peckinpah had not yet developed the difficult behavior that was to plague his productions in later years. Mariette Hartley did note, however, that on the bus coming home from the Sierras, he started drinking and playing cards, and at one point, he snapped at her just viciously. Having had an alcoholic father, she recognized the behavior at once, but she said that was the only time that she ever saw him drink on the production of this movie. Now, he actually tailored much of the character of Steve Judd to reflect his own father. Judd's most memorable line in the movie was, "I just want to enter my house justified." And that was a biblical reference that he had heard his father say many times. On seeing the finished film, Peckinpah's sister actually cried. She was struck by how effectively and completely he had captured the essence of the old man on screen. Now, Sam Peckinpah liked to tease the naive, inexperienced Mariette Hartley. At one point, he had been tipped off that Hartley had worn the wrong socks for a scene in which the socks would actually not ever be seen in the shot. Peckinpah pretended to have a major fit, accusing her of ruining the shot. He also kept telling her that if she didn't perform to his liking, he would give her part to a different actress. Initially, she really thought he was going to fire her because of the stories that she had heard about him. Once she found out the truth about it, she was pretty good-natured about it and had nothing but admiration and affection for the director. I feel this movie is a pretty amazing movie. At the very beginning, it's kind of listless, but as time goes on, it turns into a fascinating film. With these two actors that have such a rich history in westerns, you could hardly go wrong. You add Sam Peckinpah into the mix, and I think you've got a great film. Take a look at it. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.